I'm Deb Rhoda. Thank you. I'm Deb Rhoda, and today we're going to be talking about the support part of supported education when we're talking for first episode psychosis. So just briefly, we're going to spend a couple seconds on why it's important that people think about school and what specifically supported education looks like for people who are working with a coordinated specialty care team, and spend a fair amount of time on both formal and informal supports that exist so we can make sure that we're helping people access all the pieces they need to really be successful. So attending and completing school, developmentally appropriate for people who are in first episode psychosis programs. It's a place to be with their peers. That's part of the transition onto employment. It's kind of expected that people go to school at some point in their lives. And there's a lot that shows that it's an essential part of recovery, giving people meaning, giving people access to kind of what everyone else is doing and staying on track. So not only academic attainment, but there's a lot of pieces that school really helps people with. So when we think about peer relationships, think about social interactions, cognitive progress, emotional control, behavioral expectations, and also kind of that physical and moral development all really kind of come into play when people are in school. When someone experiences that first or early episode of psychosis, it can often get in the way. So it can disrupt where they're at with their academic work or some of the developmental targets, may cause poor performance when people may have been doing well in school before. And we see that there's a really high dropout rate from school and college. High school and college. I found this that over 4 million young adults fail to graduate from college due to an early onset of a psychiatric disability. So that's a lot of time lost and a lot of what can be really demoralizing for people when they were feeling really comfortable and confident in where they wanted to go. When people are in those initial phases, it can get in the way of that academic performance. It can get in the way of social behaviors they may have had before that episode occurred. We'll see increases in absence from school and really disengaging. We see the functional decline a lot often more than we'll see the symptoms. So we'll see this withdrawing from school. We'll see some of the social changes before maybe we'll start seeing frank psychotic symptoms, hallucinations, delusions, that kind of thing. When people report on the barriers to pursuing education, they say that symptoms, people who experience that actually underutilize campus counseling services. It impacts finances, social support. People report that they feel stigmatized by faculty and other students. And this one was one that I think we can spend a lot of effort in changing, and that's that mental health professionals view coursework as stressful and therefore discourage people to either enroll or re-enroll in school. So this is our opportunity to really move that needle and really help people see that they can enroll or re-enroll in school and be very successful. So in just thinking about what supported education can look like, we need to think about more than just the academics when we're supporting people in their educational pursuits. So there's a lot of decision-making that goes on when you're in school. There's managing symptoms, there's medications and managing those side effects, building skills not only for academics, but also just life in general, coming up with the best coping strategies, developing different problem-solving pieces, as well as us helping with advocacy, linkage, and referral. It's the supported education specialist, and it's the entire team. So all of us are interacting with folks, and all of us can really help support people in their success in their educational pursuits. So the therapist, the case manager, whoever the licensed medical provider is, that family specialist, peer support specialist, nurse, any members of the team absolutely have a duty, if I can use that word, to really help people with their educational pursuits. So we're constantly assessing, monitoring what's going on with people, what's happening in class. Are there any things with attention or concentration, attendance? Time management is a huge issue when you're in school. Self-care, social needs, and then education and advocacy about what accommodations and supports are out there and how do we think about what might be useful for someone. So when we're thinking about assessment, we want to really assess an individual's strengths, needs, and preferences. And this is an ongoing assessment process. Sometimes people will think of assessment as an event. It's ongoing. We're constantly assessing, we're constantly working because people are constantly changing, growing, and things are adapting for themselves. We want to really help the individual think about what has worked in the past when these kinds of situations may have come up. What has been some challenges in the past, and how have you gotten past those challenges? A big piece when we're thinking about school is really helping the person think through what is their learning style? What's their ideal learning style, a preferred learning style, or what do they find most challenging? So some people are much better if they hear things. Some people are much better if they see things. Some people need to be active or experiential, and some really need kind of that combination to really absorb information and learn it in a way that they can use it. There's a lot of decisions, where to go to school. Do you want to be close to home, in-state, out-of-state, face-to-face, virtual, hybrid? Where are you going to live? Are you going to live at home, in a dorm, apartment? Can you get along with the roommate? Go by yourself? How do you choose a major? How do you choose courses or what schedule to follow? These are all things that we can really work with individuals to help them kind of think through the advantages and disadvantages of each of these decisions. Thinking about strengths and challenges about social interaction, social cognition. There's a lot of informal social support that exists, and specifically in college campuses, when we think about students with psychosis, there's NAMI on campus. And we also need to think about not just psychosis or mental health focused kinds of supports. There's a lot of other aspects of supports that exist. There might be a gaming club. They might enjoy sports. There might be spiritual, cultural, or other identity-based groups, the Greek organizations. And so helping people kind of think about how do they find their people and how do they engage in ways that will help them have those supports necessary so they can keep moving forward. We also want to think about their access to services while they're in school. So think about the team. What services or appointments do we have available that would fit a school schedule? If someone's going to college, let's say, that isn't close to where your program is, are there remote or telehealth options so the person can stay engaged with the team while they're at school? Is there another team that might be close to the school they're going? Or what options do exist if there is no program that's close to where they're going to school? Also, what services will the person access when school's on break? So if they choose a team that's closer to their school, but now they're home for summer break, how do they stay engaged? Do they re-engage with us? Do they go with the team that was closer to school? That kind of thing. I want to spend a little bit of time about accommodations and supports. Seeking formal supports is one element of being successful in school. And so when we think about that, it's really the sharing of information about your situation. It needs to be that informed choice. So you need to disclose and request for formal supports. There's pros and cons to that. So who has access to this information? How is that information going to be used? And especially, how is that going to be best for the individual trying to be successful in school? So regardless of what that decision is, we'll want to revisit this periodically, and especially if someone has declined seeking formal supports and now starts having some specific challenges. Is this an opportunity to maybe then pursue those formal supports again? So there's a couple of different programs. When someone's in high school, there's two specific formal supports that exist. One is an individualized education plan, or an IEP. So that's for students who require specialized instruction and related services. And there's 504 plans. So their students receive accommodations that will kind of help them access the learning environment. So IEPs are governed by the special education law. And so someone needs to have one or more of the 13 qualifying disabilities, and that because of that disability, they need specialized instruction to make progress in school. It's important to recognize not all students who have disabilities require specialized instruction. So thinking about that as a resource, but this may or may not be something that the person you're working with needs to develop and access. I wanted to put up these 13 qualifying disabilities because if we look at the list, there's not a lot that maybe necessarily relates. They actually specifically name schizophrenia under emotional disturbance, which we can have a whole conversation about that. But so these are the qualifying diagnoses or disabilities, excuse me, and then based on that disability, what specialized instruction that person might need. Potentially more likely for our group are going to be 504 plans, and those are governed by the civil rights laws. So this is nice because it's any disability. It's not limited by a specific list, and just that the disability interferes with the ability to learn in the general classroom. So it actually allows for a lot more creativity and ability to identify accommodations and supports that can help an individual just be successful alongside their peers, not have to go out into special programming or anything like that. If the person needs it, absolutely, there's other options. When we look at post-secondary related, this is where then the Americans with Disabilities Acts come in. Someone to get formal supports through a post-secondary needs official registration with Office of Student Services. It's called different things on different campuses. That office then will work with an individual and you as the team to develop a letter of accommodation. And it's interesting to note that someone might have different letters of accommodation for different courses. So if you have a course that's very heavy in reading or test taking, there might be certain accommodations someone needs. If it's more public speaking, group work, things like that, there might be a different letter of accommodation that might help that individual be successful. So it's very important to really work with the individual to find what are the best accommodations that are going to help them be successful, and then work with that Office of Student Services to make sure that they have those letters available depending on the course. Not all Office of Student Services are created equal, and even not all people who work in these offices have the full range of knowledge and experience in working with people who experience psychiatric conditions. So again, accommodations could be for visual impairment, could be hearing impairment, could be physical impairments. So there's a lot of different things that these offices help people navigate and come up with accommodations. The last point I want to make about official registration is that there aren't protections that exist without that official registration and notification to a professor. So if someone's in a class, has a disability, because of that disability, has challenges and needs some additional assistance, there aren't official protections if they haven't gone through all those channels. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other supports and other ways that we can help someone. In any given course, the person can choose to share that letter of accommodation with the professor or not. They can choose when to share that. So some people will choose to share at the beginning of the class. Some people might wait until they start having problems. So the only thing to make sure the individual understands is if you wait until those problems do start to then share your letter of accommodation with the professor, your protections only start from the time that you give that notification to the professor. Some professors will work with students without official registration or a letter of accommodation. Others don't. So that's why it's really important that we're talking with individuals, helping them think about pros and cons, and really figuring out when and how to ask for accommodations. So I think these are kind of common sense, but just to kind of review some of the things that might lead to a need for accommodations. So when people have different symptoms, so not only hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, a lot of the cognitive challenges that people experience with the schizophrenia spectrum conditions can really get in the way sometimes, memory, concentration, attention, and even lethargy or tiredness, things like that. So medication side effects. Some people have difficulty screening out environmental stimuli, maintaining concentration, pressures, interacting with others. One thing I thought was really interesting, this responding to negative feedback. And this, I think, is an area we can also think about. When you get a test back or you get a paper back that has feedback from the professor of what you got wrong, it's pretty rare that there's a lot of high praise. Usually it's focusing on where you need to correct. Some people can incorporate that, take that in. Other people may get very focused on the negative and have some challenges. So when we're thinking about even an accommodation, it could even be, if today's the day I'm giving the quiz back, I'm going to meet with you half hour before class and give you your quiz back outside of the course, the classroom time, so that we have a chance to kind of talk through how you did on the quiz, what you did well, and what you might want to think about for the next time. Again, a lot of different things to think about when we're thinking about navigating school success. So again, when people experience psychosis, sometimes it's unpredictable. It might be sudden. It may come into play with interpersonal. So not just what happens when you're experiencing symptoms, but also how do you explain those symptoms afterwards when you've interacted with, fellow students or maybe a roommate, things like that. So I came up with a couple of situations, and these are kind of composites of people that I've worked with. And what I'm going to ask folks to do is kind of put in the chat, what would you do if you were working with this individual? So first, let's talk about Jordan. Jordan's 21. They've been enjoying college for 2 years now. And as they were reviewing the syllabus for the class, they see that 40% of their grade is for an oral presentation that's going to come at the end of the semester. Jordan gets very nervous when speaking in public and reports when they're that nervous, the voices are too much to control. So go ahead and put in the chat what might be some things that might be a formal accommodation or something that you recommend Jordan think about, talk to the instructor about. Someone saying perhaps pre-recording the presentation. That would be a great idea. Talk to the instructor. Present to just the teacher alone. Can they just present to the instructor? Yeah, maybe do it as a recording. Excellent. You guys are coming up with some really great ideas, practicing with a friend. Any of the things that can help the individual reduce that nervousness as well as be successful in the course. So it's a negotiation, right? Depending on if it's a public speaking class, not being able to do the presentation may not be an option. But if it's just to make sure that the individual is getting the information, sometimes even doing a paper instead of a formal presentation might work. So there's different things that we can do, but absolutely recording it in advance, working directly with the instructor, doing it privately. There's a lot of different options. Great. Now let's talk about Carlo. So Carlo's 19. He's re-entering college this semester. He started college after high school, so it was about a year ago. And last time he cut back on his medication during finals so he'd have more energy to study. His medications made him very tired. He ended up needing to be hospitalized after his symptoms were too much for him to concentrate. So let's put in the chat, what are some things that you're going to want to talk to Carlo about, and what things that you as a team might keep track of as you're working with Carlo to be successful this semester? So talking to the provider to reevaluate the medications. So yeah, if his medications make him really tired, is there a different medication or a different structure that he might not be so tired? Starting in advance. So spreading out, that's that time management piece. spreading out so that it's not so much bunched up right around finals. Review sleep practices, absolutely. Encouraging to continue the medications. Great. Yeah, so again, there's a lot of things, and this isn't a formal accommodation through the Office of Student Services. This is us just working together to figure out, how we can help them be successful. The last person I want to talk about is Cheryl. Cheryl's 22. She's in graduate engineering program. She completed her bachelor's of science last year. Towards the end of her first semester, she asked to go to the crisis shelter to get herself safe and healthy again. She contacted all her professors, her advisor was granted incompletes for all her classes. She's trying to figure out how to get caught up from last semester while also starting this new semester. And she's also not sure how to tell her study group about her sudden disappearance last semester. So what are some things that we can think of that we can help Cheryl with? So one of the issues that can really come up for people, it's excellent to be granted incompletes. And what happens then is you're finishing the incompletes while you're also doing the next level of coursework. So is there a way to maybe lighten the load in the next semester? Depending on your financial aid, depending on other things, you may or may not be able to do that. But how can we help with time management and really take those things? So yeah, smaller course load into the next semester might be useful. How about how she might explain the sudden disappearance to her study group? So definitely, yeah, talking about pros and cons. What would you tell? What wouldn't you tell? How would you tell? Why would you tell? And absolutely, one choice is not telling at all, right? You don't have to say anything. Sometimes people don't want to disclose anything. Sometimes actually feel like that's the best way to break the stigma and normalize things. So it's absolutely the conversation with the individual, how they feel comfortable and how they share that information. Excellent. So I'm going to keep us moving forward a little bit here. If I can get the slides to cooperate. And you were going to get the handouts to you, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through, but these are a whole bunch of different accommodations that might exist. And so just as we're kind of looking through, thinking before about when we were saying different learning styles. So if you're someone that learns better hearing than reading, there's software that exists that will turn text into words. And so maybe even just getting that software. So instead of having to read books and articles, it can turn it into audio for you so that you can learn that way. Or the other direction, there's voice to text. So if you're much better reading things than you are listening to things, will the instructor allow you to record lectures? Sometimes lectures are even available asynchronously that way. We talked about the private feedback on your performance. In exams, one thing that I found really interesting that someone said worked for her specifically is she would become so overwhelmed just looking at all the questions. And so she had worked out with her instructors that her tests would be printed one question per page. And so she would have the whole test in a folder. She would take out page 1, answer that question, put it aside. Take out page 2, answer that question, put it aside. Something that sounds pretty simple, but was extremely helpful for her so that she could keep her focus and kind of keep moving forward. Sometimes there might be the ability to substitute assignments, written assignments versus oral and vice versa, things like that. So again, be creative, really work with the individual to figure out what's going to help them be successful and how we can get that going and whether it's formal or informal. And things change throughout the semester, so we want to make sure we're checking in. The last point I want to make about accommodations is not all accommodations are reasonable. So we need to keep into account as we're helping people be creative, that if the accommodation poses any direct threat to health or safety, that's not going to be accommodated. If the accommodation means a substantial change in the essential element of the curriculum, that accommodation is not going to be accepted. If it substantially alters the manner in which educational opportunities, such that the course objectives are being altered, that's not a reasonable accommodation. And finally, if it presents an undue financial or administrative burden on the institution, that's not an accommodation that's going to be accepted. That said, there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot that we can do to really help people be successful in these pieces. So finally, just reminding us that there's a wide range of formal and informal supports that we can help people be successful. The team absolutely can help in a lot of different ways, and checking in frequently throughout, because those changes may happen, needs may adjust, things like that. And even if a person chooses not to disclose or seek formal accommodations, that doesn't mean that we can't continue to support their education. So with that, I thank you for your time.